Hey, what is going on guys? Danny here, welcome back to the channel and I hope you've all been doing well. A few days ago, AMD's highly anticipated RX 6800 and 6800 XT graphics cards had hit store shelves, well assuming your retailer even had them in stock because it was just another disaster, basically a paper launch. It was extremely difficult to get your hands on one of these new GPUs, and that is quite a shame because I know for a fact that many PC gamers and PC hardware enthusiasts who couldn't get their hands on Nvidia's RTX 30 series were instead looking to try their luck with AMD, but as it turns out, that didn't go too well for them either. In some cases, this was probably a worser launch than Nvidia's RTX 30 series, as many retailers, even worldwide, reportedly stopped taking orders, as this was just a release for the reference models, which generally are a bit more limited. But hopefully stock gets replenished, and once AIBs roll out their custom models, we'll start seeing more stock hit store shelves, but until then, good luck trying to get your hands on one of these new GPUs. Anyways, that's not the topic for this video. We're instead going to be discussing that if these GPUs were in stock, which one should you buy? Should you buy the RTX 3080 from Nvidia, or should you instead buy AMD's new Radeon RX 6800 XT? The answer to that question isn't so simple, as it depends on a lot of factors and ultimately comes down to the user preferences, such as which resolution they play at, whether they care about ray tracing performance, and if they're a content creator. There's a lot more to take into account than just, hey, Nvidia's faster, so go buy them, or AMD is faster, so go buy the 6800 XT. So we'll be going over all the pros and cons for these GPUs, talk about where they excel out, talk about the disadvantages, and hopefully by the end of this video that should give you a more clear understanding of what GPU fits your needs best and which one you should buy. So to start off, let's start with the basics, addressing which card is faster when it simply comes to raw traditional rasterization performance. AMD have seriously made some huge strides with their new RDNA 2 based RX 6000 graphics cards. With their previous generation graphics cards, the top tier GPU, the 5700 XT, could really only compete with the 2070 Super at best. While Nvidia had top tier graphics cards like the 2080 Super and 2080 Ti remain uncontested. Even the generation before that, the 1080 Ti was significantly ahead of the RX Vega 64 and in many cases had lost to the 1080. That's not the case anymore, where now the RX 6800 XT competes head-on against Nvidia's top dog RTX 3080, trading blows in many titles, offering very comparable performance. In fact, on average, at lower resolutions like 1080p and 1440p, the 6800 XT edges out the RTX 3080, and even in some cases, the more stupidly expensive RTX 3090. It's only at 4K where the 3080 is able to flex all its cores and put them to use where the 6800 XT falls slightly behind. In this case, a strong argument can be made in favor of the RX 6800 XT that if all you care about is raw traditional rasterization performance at lower resolutions like 1080p and 1440p because you might be gaming on a 1440p 144Hz monitor for example, then AMD looks like the better option here. However, if you want to game at 4K, that is where the Ampere based RTX 3080 truly shines, and this was something I even said in my review of the RTX 3080. When I saw its 1440p performance and compared it to previous generation RTX 2080 Super, I immediately said that for lower resolutions, there's just better options, or there will be better options coming out, such as the 3070 or AMD, and it looks like AMD in my opinion have won in that category. But at 4K, the 3080 performs at its best, as this is a much heavier resolution with a massive pixel count that can utilize its full shader count, and it does do better than the 6800 XT. Although that's not to say that the 6800 XT isn't good at 4K, it definitely can game at that resolution. However, if you're like me and want to take advantage of a high refresh 4K panel such as the LG C9 OLED at 120Hz, then the 3080 will most likely be better able to fulfill that requirement, as I want all the performance I can get. So in regards to traditional rasterization performance, both the 6800 XT and 3080 offer excellent performance, with the 6800 XT being the better choice for low-res gamers and the 3080 being great for high-res gaming. Now, that's just traditional rasterization performance. There are, of course, many notable titles out in the market and will be coming out in the near future with support for Microsoft's DirectX ray tracing, and will also include tech such as Nvidia's DLSS, which is their super sampling tech powered by AI. I know there's a lot of you who aren't on board the ray tracing hype train just yet, and that's understandable. The library isn't as big for it to attain that must-have selling factor, and of course, we can't forget just how performance tax-heavy ray tracing is. If you guys are interested, I recently made a video where I benchmarked various titles on the 3080 which had RTX tech, and the performance drops we had seen in some cases were quite catastrophic, where turning on ray tracing would make the game go from a smooth experience to an unplayable one, and that is indeed a valid concern for a lot of people. Why bother with ray tracing if I'll have to lower the resolution or lower other settings, which will impact my overall image quality as a trade-off for prettier shadows or lighting effects, sometimes which you might not even notice. So many gamers for now are just choosing to ignore it, and I can understand that. However, with the RTX 30 series, Nvidia have remedied this, and the 3080 can deliver a playable experience in most games with ray tracing on, and when you factor in DLSS, you can also enjoy higher frame rates, as that helps boost performance by rendering at a lower res, which is then intelligently upscaled and looks pretty damn close to the native experience, but this time you can have the pleasure of experiencing ray tracing, a best of both worlds experience. But unfortunately, the same cannot be said for the RX 6800 XT. While the 6800 XT and the rest of the RDNA 2 based 6000 series graphics cards are capable of doing ray tracing, their performance compared to the RTX 30 series is quite lackluster. For example, in Hardware Unboxed's review of Shadow of the Tomb Raider, both the 3080 and 6800 XT offer like-for-like performance, but as soon as you turn on ray tracing, you can see the larger performance drops on the 6800 XT, where with ray tracing its performance is comparable to the older Turing GPU instead, and the RTX 3080 is significantly ahead. That's just one example, but there are many other benchmarks from various PC hardware review sites that show a similar story. Do also keep in mind that's at 1440p, where at 4K, the 6800 XT would most likely not be playable with ray tracing turned on, and the performance I mentioned earlier about the 3080 doing ray tracing was at 4K, it's just a lot more capable. I guess this is the reason why AMD didn't really bother talking about ray tracing performance during their unveil, since they knew Nvidia would have the clear advantage here. Along with that, AMD did even state that 1440p was the target resolution with ray tracing, not 4K, so that should tell you already as to where AMD falls with DXR performance. AMD also don't have an answer to Nvidia's DLSS, where you'd be able to turn it on and give the 6800 XT a much needed boost to help alleviate those performance drops. AMD have mentioned they do have their Fidelity FX super sampling in the works, but there's no concrete information on when they'll come out, how effective it'll be, and if it'll be as good as Nvidia's solution. So I don't recommend GPUs based on promised features, and if you're someone who does care about ray tracing right now, and you want a card with proven ray tracing performance, you want to take advantage of features such as DLSS, then the RTX 3080 from Nvidia is the clear choice, as it seems like AMD will probably need another generation to catch up in this area. Still, for their first attempt, it's not terrible. Now, to be fair, AMD also have their Smart Access Memory feature, which essentially is just a rebranded version of Microsoft Bar that can help boost performance in some games. With SAM, the data link between the CPU and GPU gets expanded so that the former can harness the full potential of GPU memory, utilizing the bandwidth of PCI Express to remove the bottlenecks and increase performance. Whereas before, the CPU would only have a limited access to the GPU's VRAM, a measly 256 megabytes. But with SAM, you now have full access. However, keep in mind SAM only works on RX 6000 GPUs when paired with a Ryzen 5000 series processor running on an X570 motherboard, so it's not fully accessible to everyone. So if you've got a previous gen Ryzen CPU or you're on Intel, then you won't be able to take advantage of it. With SAM, performance improvements aren't anything spectacular though. It does depend on the game, where some games show a larger increase than others, and it also depends on the resolution as well. At 4K from AMD's own benchmarks, there's an up to 11% increase, but most are in line with a 5% increase on average. Also, in Tech Power-Ups' review of the RX 6800 XT, some games even showed negative impacts to performance with SAM enabled, so it's a feature that highly depends on the way the game is coded and optimized. Nvidia don't have support for resizable bar, but according to Gamers Nexus, Nvidia are working on their own solution, and it should work with a variety of hardware and motherboards, not just AMD hardware, but Intel CPUs and motherboards as well. If they can get it working that way, then that'll probably be a better selling point on Nvidia, which is a weird thing to say considering AMD are always the ones who are about open compatibility and all that, but we'll see. Though this time I'll give the point to AMD here, as they do have working tech out in the market, whereas for Nvidia it's just a promise. Moving on, the next thing I wanted to talk about was whether you're a content creator or if you like to stream. This is an area that I feel like AMD have to drastically improve upon, and should hopefully be one of their key areas of focus now that they've got performance nailed down. As of right now, the situation here is pretty one-sided. Nvidia with their CUDA platform are just so widely integrated with popular workstation apps and programs that many workstation users opt for Nvidia GPUs solely for this reason. There's so many programs that have support for CUDA built into them, software such as Autodesk, Autodesk, Adobe Premiere, Vegas Pro, Blender, and many more that you can leverage the GPU to accelerate a rendering workload, for example, and drastically reduce exporting times. I mainly just use Vegas Pro as my main video editor as it fulfills all my needs, and I leverage my RTX 2080's NVENC encoder in my editing rig to drastically reduce render times. It's a very useful feature. However, I have seen support for AMD's VCE get added, and it does look quite good and competitive, but like I said, that's just one program, and the market share that Nvidia has when it comes to this area is in their favor, and by a big margin at that. Also, when it comes to built-in encoders, since Turing, Nvidia has had an excellent option for budget streamers and gamers who don't necessarily want to shell out money for a high core count CPU or a secondary streaming PC. The built-in NVENC encoder works very well while gaming, barely impacting performance and allowing the user to stream seamlessly to the platform of their choice, whether that's YouTube or Twitch. At lower bit rates using NVENC, it's just much more superior, especially when you're bandwidth limited in these scenarios, because mostly everyone is streaming at lower connection rates, lower resolutions, and especially if you're not partnered, you're limited there, so quality is a concern. But since Turing, the output at low bit rates is surprisingly good, comparable to CPU encodes, which are generally a lot more performance tax heavy. Aside from encoding performance, what about the whole broadcasting suite? With features like RTX Voice and RTX Broadcast, there are a lot more features that will win streamers over, and I just don't see anything as enticing from Team Red. Nvidia's software stack looks more versatile, where aside from gaming, if you want to dive into, say, animation, 3D modeling, video editing, streaming, I'd much rather want the RTX 3080 in my system as opposed to a Radeon RX 6800 XT. The next thing I wanted to talk about was variable refresh technology. Both AMD and Nvidia support this tech. Nvidia have their G-Sync and G-Sync compatible version of VRR, and AMD have got their FreeSync tech. Variable refresh is pretty awesome. It allows the monitor to sync its refresh rate with the number of frames outputted by the GPU, although it's at a specified limited range. This results in a smoother image that also prevents screen tearing. Now, it wasn't until early 2019 where Nvidia opened up their G-Sync tech to allow monitor manufacturers who implemented VRR to support G-Sync or Nvidia GPUs without the need for their proprietary module. This was known as the G-Sync compatible feature set, and this was why FreeSync was often touted as the better choice, because you didn't necessarily need to shell out a few extra hundreds of dollars for the same monitor just with a G-Sync module. Now, that's not the case anymore, as there are a wide variety of monitors that can leverage G-Sync under the G-Sync compatible branding. Also, existing monitors that did support FreeSync could also leverage G-Sync now, because like I said, it's all based on the same VESA adaptive sync tech. However, it was hit or miss, as my BenQ XL 2730Z, which has a FreeSync supported panel, just didn't work at all. And I tried a lot of things, so keep that in mind when choosing a monitor for your Nvidia GPU. If you want one that supports G-Sync compatible, you want one that's actually certified by them. Likewise, if you've got a FreeSync monitor or the monitor you're planning on buying supports FreeSync, then you're better off buying the RX 6800 XT just to avoid any headaches. It's actually one of the reasons why I'm choosing to opt for the 6800 XT for my personal system, as I know I'll be able to use FreeSync again, and that'll be awesome. Whereas for my TV, I'm going to be using the RTX 3080, as the LG OLED C9 has support for G-Sync compatible. So there isn't really a clear winner here, and it's more dependent on the user's personal preference for their display. Finally, the last thing I wanted to discuss was pricing. Taking into account MSRPs of the 6800 XT, which is $50 cheaper at $649 compared to the RTX 3080 at $699, that really doesn't sound like a big difference, although MSRP is somewhat of an inaccurate way of comparing these two cards right now, as due to the shortages of stock and supply issues, a lot of retailers don't even have the cards priced at where they should be and are listed a bit higher. Also, I understand regional pricing can vary greatly too, depending on where you are in the world. Also, as most people will be opting for AIB models, prices can increase there as well. But overall, the 6800 XT should come in quite a bit cheaper than the RTX 3080. For example, Canadian pricing for the RX 6800 XT was around $850 to $870, whereas most RTX 3080s are hovering around that $1,000 to $1,100 price point, and that is indeed a big difference. Even if the 3080 offers drastically better ray tracing performance, it's hard to say if someone will be willing to pay that much for it. Let's just say both of these cards were available and I was looking at them right now at my local computer hardware store. I would be leaning towards the Radeon GPU because I'd be able to save quite a bit of money there. for the same rasterization performance. And at that point, I'd say I can probably make do with lower ray tracing performance. I'll make some compromises in the settings, and that'll at least allow me to get a playable experience if I choose to do so. Or, I can totally ignore ray tracing for another gen. It's not the end of the world. On the other hand, if the price difference really did come to about $50 or so, then I'd be willing to pay that difference for the RTX 3080, so I'd be able to take advantage of all the features I mentioned before. If $50 more is all it takes to get me significantly better ray tracing performance, better production capability, better streaming tools, hey, I'm all for it. It's tough, and when I said at the beginning of this video that it's not a simple answer, I actually did mean that because there are so many factors involved that ultimately you, the user, will have to decide what works best for your use case. To recap, in terms of raw rasterization performance, the 6800 XT seems like the better and cost-effective choice for lower resolutions and a high refresh gaming. The RTX 3080 seems to shine at higher resolutions like 4K or ultra-wide formats. In regards to ray tracing, the RTX 3080 is the clear winner here. If you're going to be interested in titles like CD Projekt Red's Cyberpunk, which has support for Nvidia's RTX and DLSS, then Team Green is the route you'll want to go. AMD does have a performance-enhancing feature, Smart Access Memory, but it's not something earth-shattering and at most can give you an up to 10% performance bump. When it comes to streaming and production, Nvidia seems to also have that in the bag, but pricing, cost per frame, performance per dollar, that is in AMD's favor, but this can vary depending on where you are in the world. So hopefully after going through all of that, I've given you guys a more clear picture on what GPU you should probably buy. Like I said, there's a lot of things to consider, but you as the user can now make a more informed decision once these GPUs are readily available. I hope you guys found this video to be informative and helpful. Let me know your thoughts down below. Check out the video description on ways to support the channel and for my other videos. If you guys are interested in more content like this, then make sure you're subscribed. Thanks for watching, take care, and I'll see you guys in the next one.